What's up guys, my name is Seville, and today I'm counting down my top 10 favorite Superman 6-inch action figures. For this list, my rules are simple. It simply needs to be based on some version of him that still maintained the classic origins of him being raised by the Kents, becoming Clark Kent, and Superman. Therefore, figures based on Elseworlds stories like Red Sun will not count here. Now if you can give me just a few more seconds, I'll get right into it, starting at number 10. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and comment below. And if you want to see more from me, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. So, starting my list off at number 10 is Mattel's DC Unlimited New 52 Superman. Now to be completely honest, I didn't really like the fact that the stories were rebooted in the New 52. However, I did like that the suit was treated as Kryptonian technology and nanotech armor. And when it came time for this figure, the glossy paint job captured that look very, very well. So well, in fact, that it actually made me appreciate the New 52 story more than I ever thought I would. So, even without being the classic design everyone knows, it's still a really great figure. And it does help that the overall design was created by Jim Lee. Speaking of Jim Lee, number 9 is the Jim Lee Superman based on Batman's Hush story. Even though this is the version that's being controlled by Poison Ivy, it's still a really great Superman figure. It certainly captures the essence of how Superman appeared in the comics during that time, and showed that DC Direct could certainly make a great 3D figure out of a 2D image. For number 8, I'm going to move back to Mattel with the recent DC Multiverse Kingdom Come Superman. This is a figure that myself, and certainly a lot of other Superman collectors, wanted to see in highly articulated form. With the exception of the head sculpt, it does borrow a lot of parts from the DC Rebirth Superman, but that's okay. Before this figure, the DC Direct versions of Kingdom Come Superman had very limited articulation. They could never be put into a flight pose like the one you see here. My only real disappointment with this figure is that the white streaks on the side of his hair weren't really as prominent as they should have been. Moving on to number 7, I have the Mattel DC Movie Masters Man of Steel Superman. I know a lot of people didn't really like the darker colors on Man of Steel, but I was personally never really opposed to it. I do think that this figure captured the essence of that film's look pretty well. The only thing I would say it was lacking was in the head sculpt. It doesn't really look like Henry Cavill, but in all honesty, none of the Mattel ones since this figure have looked like him either. There have been some imports that did a much better job of that, but they were a little out of my price range at the time, and most certainly even more so now. Taking the number 6 spot is the DC Direct Black Lantern Earth 2 Superman. This figure makes my list because it was one of my favorite stories in DC at the time. Beyond that, the sculpting detail in this figure is phenomenal, and it absolutely captures the essence of that character at the time. Normally, I don't really like modern figures that have the pre-posed articulation like this one does, but this is one of my exceptions. Unfortunately, because of that molding choice, there's not a lot you can do with it without some sort of stand to help hold it up. Before I get into the top 5 portion of the video, I do want to make one honorable mention of the NECA Christopher Reeve 7-inch Superman. Ultimately, while I've always heard this is a great figure, I don't actually own it. I missed my chance to get it when Toys R Us is still around, and the aftermarket prices are just a little too high for me right now. Therefore, without being able to directly compare it to my others, it would be unfair to place it in the list. With that said though, it's time to move on to number 5 with Mattel's DC Unlimited Injustice Superman. The Injustice video game series have been some of my favorites of the recent years, and this figure captures the essence of the first game's Superman very well. Just in case you don't know, a quick summary of that story is that Superman becomes a murderous dictator after being tricked by the Joker. Of course, while I prefer heroic Superman, this version has certainly earned his spot on my shelf. Moving on with the number 4 spot, I'm kind of cheating a little bit in using 2 figures, but that's because they are the lightning-based red and blue Superman. These come from Mattel's DC Universe Classics line and are based on one of my favorite stories from the late 90s. In it, there was a sequence of events that caused Superman's physiology to change entirely, turning him into a being of pure energy. Eventually, a plot by the cyborg Superman accidentally split him into 2 different beings, thus creating Superman Blue and Superman Red. After about a year though, he did eventually return to his classic form. Speaking of his classic form, around this same time, Superman the Animated Series was popular on TV, which leads to my number 3 spot, the DC Collectibles Animated Superman figure. The entire series of animated figures looked like they walked straight out of the cartoons, and this is no exception. This figure came in a 2-pack with Lois, making it all the more worthwhile. It hasn't been that long ago since I did a comparison video of this figure with the Justice League single pack version, but even then, I knew this figure would be very high in my top 10 list. Moving on to number 2, I have another DC Universe Classics Superman, this time with the long hair. In case you haven't noticed the pattern, I do have a bit of an affinity with the 90s. As a child of the 80s, I was a teenager in the 90s, and that's pretty much when I went all in with my obsession of Superman. Back then, Kenner was responsible for making the DC figures, and I had most of those growing up. The Power Flight Superman you see here on the right was one of my favorite toys for a very long time. Therefore, when Mattel made their version, there was no question about whether or not I would own it, because it creates a very strong sense of nostalgia for that time.
And then, the worst Superman never destroyed, Bizarro number 1.
What? No. Bizarro, you don't count. You're not really Superman.
Wrong! Bizarro not Superman, and not qualifying for bottom 10.
Yes. No. Wait, what? Crap, you're speaking backwards. You think you are qualifying.
No! Bizarro number 1.
Bizarro, you don't really count because you're not also Clark Kent.
Bizarro not Clark Kent.
Right. No, wait. I think we're still mixed up.
Bizarro number 1, worst never. Boo!
I'm going to have to actually say this backwards so that you understand. You do count in the bottom 10 because you were always Clark Kent. Therefore, you are number 1 and you are on the list.
Yes, Bizarro am Clark Kent. So, Bizarro am number 1.
However, you are made very different from other ancient Superman figures and look very far from their molds. Therefore, I have decided to make you a dishonorable mention.
No, not dishonorable mention. This make Bizarro little sad.
Okay, good. I'm glad you're happy.
Sad!
Sad. Whatever. Okay, on to the real number 1. Officially taking the number 1 spot is the DC Direct 21 Points of Articulation Superman. For me, this figure captures the most basic essence of what I think of when I think of Superman. At the time it was made, it was certainly highly articulated compared to most of the market, and while more modern figures have improved upon the articulation style, this one still manages to pull off most of the common poses. In fact, when it comes to flight poses, this is still one of the best looking ones to date. So there you have it, my top 10 6th-gen Superman figures. Do you agree with my list? Is there anything you would take out, or anything you would add in? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching, and if you like this video,
Get over here!
and subscribe to Civilian Collectibles.